Alright, welcome back to our second racing game of our first episode of Harvard Plays Retro. And we're looking at F-Zero, which is one of the launch titles for the Super Nintendo back in 1990. So when the SNES came out in Japan, there were two games available. It was Super Mario World, which was bundled with the console, and F-Zero, which was the only game available. And when it came to America, a year later, it was this game, Super Mario World, and Pilot Wings. So I think that this game was one of the ones that Nintendo was using to try and flex on Sega's hardware. And in some ways it is a more traditional racing game, and it is much more successful at being a mechanical racing game compared to Outrun and compared to a lot of other Sega's offerings. But in other ways, I think it's not quite as effective. And so I think it's interesting to look back at some of these design decisions and analyze how the limitations and the strengths of each set of hardware affects the game that was made. But first of all, let's just play a few levels, see how it goes. Now, this game is single player only, and the main mode is Grand Prix. You have 4 cars to choose from, and the best one is this red one, which is the Fire Stingray. It has the slowest acceleration, but the fastest top speed, and so if you want to do well, you usually pick this one. There's 3 leagues, and each league has, I believe, 4 courses for a total of 12. I could be wrong, but yeah, let's start with the Night League. And there's 2 difficulty levels, but we'll start... Oh, there's 3 actually. There's Beginner, Standard, and Expert. But we'll start at Beginner because this game is very difficult. Okay, so we're starting off in Mute City. And before we start, you'll notice that... I keep muscle memorying the wrong button to accelerate, because in Outrun it's the left one and then this one's the bottom one. Anyways, you'll see that in our top right we have a power bar, and that is effectively it's our health. So if we hit a wall like this, you'll see that our power went down a little bit, and if that goes to 0, we'll actually explode and we'll lose the race. And we'll also lose a life in that bottom right where it says the ship. There's a number 2, and that's how many lives they have. Now on the top left, you'll see that the way this race works is there's 15 races, and every time you pass the finish line, a bunch of them get eliminated. So you have to be above a certain number when you cross the finish line in order to survive and keep going. And I'm on rank 2 right now, which is not too bad. I do like that there's a very useful mini-map in the bottom left, which shows what the course looks like. And this was something that was definitely missing from Outrun. The ability to foretell what the curves are going to be. And one more thing you can do is you can press A to do a quick boost, and this drastically increases your top speed for a little bit. And you'll see in the bottom right, the little green S is how many boosts you have. So every time you finish a lap, you'll get an additional boost, and you want to use them in long straight stretches like this one. So it changes the top speed from what was something like 400 kilometers an hour to about 590. So it's a significant increase. Okay, you can replenish your power by driving in these pit stop lines, but if you go at them at full speed, you can't replenish that much. You only get a little bit. So you want to slow down a bit if you really need a lot of power. Now the controls for this game is just accelerate, brake, boost, left and right, but there's also, if you press the L and R shoulder buttons like I'm doing right now, you can see the car slightly lean to the left and to the right, and that's a strafe. And so that can help you round some of the more difficult corners in the later levels of the game a bit more efficiently. And there's a few stage hazards where strafe is extremely important. But here you don't really need it. Right now all you need to do is just follow the racing line, avoid the other races, and try to finish without exploding. You might need to use a boost here. Alright, so we're back in number 1. There's lots of previous races that you need to pass. Don't need to worry about them too much. Alright. And you see that camera swivel is something that absolutely couldn't have been done in Outrun, right? This game is also not exactly a 3-dimensional space. It is still the illusion of 3D, but it does it in a very different way, and it allows it to do things like that camera swivel we just saw. And I bet the second that Sega and kids in the 90s saw that, they just lost their minds, right? That's not something that used to be able to be done. Alright, so this is level 2, this is Big Blue, and this is one of the most famous tracks in retro game music, so just listen to it go. So this is definitely a game that wants to show off the Super Nintendo sound chip. You remember the NES only had like little bleeps and bloops, right? And this one has proper MIDI instrumentation, so they make the most of it here. Got the synth brass horns, they've got the... If you actually isolate the soundtrack, it's a very dirty slap bass line, it's great. And I think the music is one of the most effective things in this game to sell the sensation of speed, because the music is at a fast pace, so you feel like you're going at a fast pace. If we were to turn the music off, I feel like this would look a lot more boring, because especially in these early levels, there is just a lot of downtime. There's a lot of long stretches of just waiting for the next turn to come up. And it's not that urgent, right? Like, the game can tell you you're going at 400 kilometers an hour, but it doesn't really feel like it. It just feels ordinary. But maybe that's me. I think later in the levels, the turns do get a bit more hectic and there's more required of the player. But right now, you know, it's just chill. It's not that mind-blowing. I guess part of it is just the modern context as well. We've seen this series develop into F-Zero X and then GX on the GameCube, and then the Wipeout series came and expanded upon this ideal. So going back to this very first game on the SNES, it doesn't have a lot going for it, in my opinion at least. It doesn't have the same timeless appeal that I feel Outrun has, but that is my subjective opinion. Alright, I'm hitting a lot of walls, you can see my power going down. I'm gonna try and get a bit further ahead for this last lap. I'm not actually too sure of how the AI in this game works, but you can notice that if there's a car behind you, it shows a little check indicator, which shows you where they are, and that helps you avoid collisions from behind that you couldn't have predicted. And I think that in itself makes this feel like a more fully rounded racing game, right? It's not as fake as the obstacles in Outrun. These are actually other cars, and whether they exist around the whole track, I'm not actually too sure, but they definitely exist next to you, right? They feel like other races, they feel like competitors, and so you can feel a bit competitive when you're doing this race. Okay, next level is called Sand Ocean. There is also a speed boost that's like, you know how in Mario Kart, if you press the button at the right time, you get a boost? I don't know exactly the timing in this game though, so I've never been able to get a really good one. This music track has always been a bit weird to me because it sounds very relaxed. It sounds like what a town track would sound like in an RPG. And I think maybe they did it to give a sense of like the sereneness of the desert, or maybe that kind of slow, epic Odyssey kind of soundtrack, but yeah, it doesn't really work as well as the last one. Okay, you can start to see that the levels now are having more complex topography. You can see there's a bunch of hairpin turns coming up, and they don't really feel like it when you're in them. You rarely need to brake or do anything drastic, but they do force you to think carefully about how you use your boosts and how you manage the other races. You can also see the road's actually quite a bit narrower than it was in the last match. These are all the different ways that the game starts to regulate its difficulty. Right, so here's a long stretch, so let's use our boosts. Get back into the leading position. Okay, missed it. Yeah. And And another thing that I find really interesting about F-Zero is that it has quite a substantial lore to it. The game came bundled with, I think, a comic book, and it explains the characters and the world that we're in. The TLDR version, I'm sure there's a better YouTube video that outlines it. The TLDR version is that it's in the distant future, and there are big corporations that have too much money and they have no idea what to do with it. And so they sponsor a series of very dangerous high-speed races. And they have these drivers that pilot these hover cars at really fast speeds that can explode at the drop of a hat. And this is kind of like gladiatorial combat, right? It's the entertainment of a ruling class to have racers engage in this dangerous behavior, and whoever comes out on top earns a bunch of money, I guess? I'm not too sure about it. But it means that these racetracks are these giant floating structures that are high above the city. And so you don't really get a sense of depth here, but you can imagine that this racetrack is actually suspended over a big, wide desert. And in the previous levels, Big Blue was over the ocean, and the first one, Root City, you could kind of see the individual city roads in the background. And so that gives a bit of texture to this world. Oh, I'm getting power down. So when you get power down, that means you're very close to your car exploding. And I'm so close to finishing the race, I really don't want that to happen. Oh my goodness, oh no. Okay. Okay, I didn't think I would explode on the first course. I mean the first cup, but hey, that happened. So what you do is you lose a life and you start again. This time I need to be more careful. You see the little circles on the side of the road? Those actually reduce your power if you drive over them. Like right now you can see my power slowly start to reduce. And it doesn't seem like that much, but over the course of 5 laps, it can take its toll. So you do want to be a bit more careful. This track is definitely narrower than the previous two, so you can't be reckless when you're making a turn. You can't hit the walls like you normally would in a different racing game. You need to be very careful. Okay, so this time I'm going to focus, no risky turns, and hopefully I can get past this without repeating myself too much. Yeah, like I was saying before, once you take the cool music out of the level, it definitely doesn't feel as interesting. It doesn't feel as fast. Okay, probably should have braked for that one. I'm definitely guilty of when I play racing games, I don't brake very often. The other cars, I don't know how the AI is programmed, but they can be quite aggressive sometimes, and they'll try to knock you into walls. And this game, we'll explain a bit more in the mechanics section of this video, but it doesn't have true object collision because of the way that the SNES is assigned. So when you hit a wall, instead of kind of skating along it like you're driving in real life, you'll bounce right off it, and then this will probably throw your directions right off, and you'll bounce into another car or another wall, and you'll take a huge amount of damage, like this then. You take a huge amount of damage in a very short amount of time, and then without even realizing it, your car will just explode. And that's the challenge of this game. Is to try and manage with these kind of wonky collision physics and try not to explode. Alright, here's a long stretch, so let's use our boosts. See, that barely restored any power at all, because I was going too fast, so I wasn't in that zone for very long. If I slowed down, I probably would have got a bit more, but I am 3rd place, and you need to be 3rd place to move on, so time is of the essence right now. How many laps are there? There's 2 laps left. Those 2 cars in front of me are really, really fast. When they're flashing like that, it means that if you touch them, they'll explode, and that deals a lot of damage to your car, so you kind of want to avoid that. Okay, let's get some more power. That did not work well. That's one of those moments where using the strafe would be better, because you can much more finely maneuver your way into the line and then off it when you're not. Okay, power down. It's okay. 1 lap left, we can do it. As long as we don't get bumped into the side like just then, we'll be fine. Okay, no bumping. No bumping. I hate this siren. Okay. This is very dangerous, and also I'm 4th, so if I don't... Oh, okay. You know, when I was rehearsing for this video, I definitely wasn't as bad as I am right now. I don't know what's gotten into me. Okay, one more try before I run out of lives. Okay, you can see the strafe is very subtle. So it's definitely more of an expert maneuver. It's good for very slight changes of your direction. I think it's just the narrowness of this course that's getting to me. If you hit a wall, you bounce into the next wall. There's not a lot of forgiveness in this. Whoa, like that. Ah. Okay. I don't actually know what this purple car is. I can't remember if there's a purple car in the ones that you can drive. Okay, this turn is definitely one I should have braked for. The controls are fairly responsive for the most part. The only downside is that because this was originally made for an SNES pad, you can't do fine-tuning with your turns. It's either you're turning or you're not, right? You can't do like slight turns or gradual turns. So you need to get used to that. And also, a piece of history. This game came out with a commercial starring Paul Rudd. And this was in the 1990s, and he was playing F-Zero on an SNES at one of those drive-in movie theaters, which just don't exist today anymore. And it was like really trying to juice up the fact that this was a powerful console and it had like lightning bolts in the background. And it's actually really funny. And if you watch the commercial today, it's like Paul Rudd has not aged at all. He looks exactly the same, even though it's been, oh my goodness, 30 years. This is a 30-year-old game, guys. That's crazy. It still plays pretty well, I would say. Enough that it can hold your attention in 2020. That's impressive. If you think about the games that are coming out today that people will be playing in 2050, that's pretty impressive to get to that level. Okay, so we're on power down already, and we're on the second last lap, so we've got to be very careful. We haven't used any boosts yet either. I don't know how well I'm going to go with this one. Okay. And now we gracefully slide into the refill. Oh, that was barely anything. Okay, final lap. So make sure we don't hit anything. We're on the second place, so as long as we finish the level, I'll be pretty happy with that. Okay, I'm getting the sirens now. I didn't expect this session to be so tense. I'm actually like clutching the controller so hard right now. Okay, it's gonna make these hairpin turns and not explode. This is not a good sign. Oh, got a sliver of health left. And we're in 4th place, so we've got to overtake someone somehow. Oh, use the boost. Nah, we didn't make it. This is a hard game. I was beginner class. Okay, so I guess what we'll do is we'll have a look at how this game is made, and then maybe our knowledge of the mechanics and a bit of off-screen practice will get me through to beating at the very least the first couple, because I feel like I haven't. This isn't my proudest moment, you know. This is a dark day for Harvard Plays. All right, so let's take a look at the hardware behind this game, and then we'll get back to it. Okay, now let's take a look at how Nintendo uses the technology of the SNES to create a similar sense of 3 dimensions, even though their game is also, really, it's a 2D game.
and they managed to create the sense of perspective, but in an entirely different way to how Outrun does it. Now let's take a look. So the unique thing about the SNES is it had this technology called Mode 7, and it was able to take one very large image and transform it in a variety of ways. And so the main functions were that it allows the image to be zoomed in and out, it allows it to be rotated and flipped as well, and it could be transformed and stretched and deformed. So you can make it into different shapes, squash it, change its proportions, and this is exactly how the effect on F-Zero was created. So let's first think about how perspective works compared to top-down versus what we're seeing now. And yes, warning, the segment has even lower quality animations. I couldn't figure out how to make it work digitally, so I had to film it. Yeah. Okay, so for the design segment on F-Zero, we have an even jankier way of explaining how this works. So I couldn't fully figure out how to make this animation, and I figured the best way to do it is just draw it out in real life. And so what I have here is a sheet of cardboard on which I've drawn a top-down picture of a road, just like in F-Zero. And the way that F-Zero does it is that its racetracks and backgrounds are just top-down images, but what they do is they transform it, so as if you move the camera down like this, and you see now, you kind of see the road panning out in front of you. And so what happens is the camera will move along, and again, you get the illusion you're driving down a three-dimensional space. Now if we were to make it a little bit more complicated, we have this bendy thing over here, and what F-Zero does is that effectively it treats this as one whole background, and it's able to change the camera here, so as long as you're making a turn, it's going to turn the camera too, so it always looks like you're moving forward. Excuse the trash can in the distance. Now, how does this work? Well, it's another trick of perspective. So if we were to take this example, this is a pair of parallel lines. They are very straight, and you can trust me on that because I drew them with my switch as a ruler. So this is exactly one switch's width. And what you can do is, if you look at it from top down, the parallel, if you want to move the camera down like this, they're not actually parallel anymore. It's a different shape. The top has been squashed down and it looks a bit more like a trapezium. And now if we were to compare this shape to what was used in Outrun, you would see that actually these become the road vectors, and you can use the exact same techniques as they did with the sprite scrollers. Okay, so let's see this in action. Okay, so now that we're back here, you can see that this image here with the road turning to the right, it really looks kind of similar to the one on the actual game, right? You can see the road actually curve here in accordance with what it says on the minimap. And that is because we're actually looking at what is a top-down image that's been transformed a little bit to make it look like we're seeing it from a perspective. And you see how this works, is that in that example, we change what was straight lines, parallel lines, into this sense of perspective. They all move towards a point, and it makes what was originally a rectangle now into a trapezium. The SNES on Mode 7 couldn't actually do that. It couldn't squash the top parts of a shape and leave the bottom halves proper. So they actually had to use this really crazy technology that involves CRT TVs and the ways they shoot electron lines, and it's really complicated. My recommendation is there's a great YouTube channel called Retro Game Mechanics Explained, and they do a great video about Mode 7 and all of its capabilities. But here's the simple version. It's basically all that the developers needed to do was take this rectangle and make it into a trapezium. And so they're squashing every image of the game from a top-down view into a perspective view. And we see what happens here is that this image here with the vanishing point looks a lot like our example from before. So all the lines are pointing towards a central moment. And we can take a look at a curved map as well, and if we do the same thing the game does and just slide in the horizon, then it kind of looks like it, right? Kind of looks like it. Yeah, I tried, but you get the sense. This is how the technology here is working, and so this is actually what's going on when you're playing the game. Is if you see this, it's actually this. It's actually a top-down map, and they've used a bunch of Mode 7 visual trickery in order to squash that image and make it look like you're looking at it from another perspective. Now, let's compare how these two images look. They both use the same sense of vanishing points and perspective, but in F-Zero you get the benefit of being able to see how the road curves as well as this little mini-map. And so this generally means that the maps can be twistier and more confusing, whereas with Outrun, they need to signpost where the turns are, and even then it's still not very clear exactly when you're turning and when it's meant to go. And now let's look at them side by side. To me, I think each game has its advantages and disadvantages, but I think it just still blows my mind that these two images, which look quite similar at the end of the day, were created using completely different means of technology. So F-Zero on the left was actually a two-dimensional top-down view of a racing track, whereas Outrun on the right is completely side-on, and the road doesn't move at all, and your car doesn't move at all. It's just generating the scenery coming at you as you move forward. I just think that's crazy, and both of them still function so well, and both of them still give an illusion of 3 dimensions and of speed. And if we look at the Mode 7 SNES way of doing this, we get the cool upside that the camera swivels whenever you take a turn, which if you compare it to Outrun, the camera had to stay completely still. And so this means that you get a better sense of cornering, and you can see where your turns are coming ahead as well. You can also see other cars on the track, and not in this example, but you can see a little warning indicator that says when they're behind you, and so it feels like you're really on a racetrack. The downsides, of course, are that if you notice all the maps are completely flat. It's because of the way the visual trickery is done. You can't have a third dimension, right? You can't have anything that rises up over the track, and so you can't have hills, you can't have obstacles. All you can have are these things on the sides. And if anyone's played Super Mario Kart, that's the same reason why the question mark boxes, the item boxes, are actually just taped onto the road. I can't really explain it very well. They're not three-dimensional either. They're just like a shape that's been drawn onto the road. Just like the side bumpers here, the little circles, they look very two-dimensional. And it also means that collision physics are a bit weird. If you play the game, you're sure that whenever you hit a wall, you bounce off really hard and you might hit the next wall and the next wall and your run's completely destroyed, right? It's because that there's no real collision physics, there's no real objects because of the way that this perspective trick is happening. So it doesn't feel quite as realistic as it could. But yeah, that's how F-Zero made its sense of 3D. What do you guys think? Let's do one more run and see if we can put some of the stuff that we thought about into action. Alright, so let's take one more crack at F-Zero, and I think this time we'll look at some of the later levels, and hopefully we will manage to prove ourselves that we're not terrible at this game, but I don't know how that's gonna go. Let's go with the Blue Falcon this time, because we should take a look at how the different cars function, although to be honest, I can't really feel a difference. I think it's something to do with acceleration and top speed, but honestly it all kind of feels the same to me. Let's do the Queen League, and we'll tackle beginner class again, because this game is very difficult, and if I'm able to show the later levels without exploding, then I hope that's gonna be something that comes up in this run. Oh, I keep forgetting what the acceleration button is too, because on Outrun it's... yeah, I've talked about this before anyway. Alright, so we're on Mute City 2. The interesting thing about this game's lore is that it says that there's a bunch of different planets, and every planet has a few different racetracks. And so we saw Mute City 1 in the first cup, this is Mute City 2. And it's meant to be this giant planet that's full of what's a whole big metropolis. And you can see on the left and right of the course, that's meant to be cities and streets and just giant urban society. But the thing is, this racetrack is meant to be hoisted up very high up into the air so that you don't really see the texture of the city. That's one of the downsides of the Mode 7 way of making 3D, is that you can't make depth. Everything needs to look just flat, because remember, we're currently just looking at a two-dimensional image. Okay, I feel like I'm starting to feel the downside of the Blue Falcon is that it's a lot slower to accelerate when we hit an obstacle, and the turning doesn't feel quite as responsive as well. But maybe I could just be making this up. Okay, I just wasted that boost. Yep, you can see here too there's jumps, and you know how it works. The jumps aren't really, you're not getting air. You're just playing out an animation that makes it seem like you're in the air, and it also helps you get past obstacles. So you can jump over parts of the terrain, you can jump over the sand and the dirt you see on the left that would slow you down otherwise. And in later levels it can get really risky, because if you mess up a jump, your car just explodes and you get no recompense for that. You just have to deal with it. But at least here it's a bit safer. You can jump over the terrain there and you don't get slowed down by it. Okay, I definitely am feeling like the red car would have been a better choice here. This car definitely feels a lot more sluggish. I don't know why. Top speed is 400 and something, but it's taking its sweet old time to get there. At least we're coming first. This run has been going a lot better than my practice run of the second cup last time. Last time I lost all my lives on the second track, so we'll see how that goes from there. Alright, we came first. We get our cool looking camera swivel, and let's move on to the next track. There's actually a neat detail. I don't know if you guys saw it, but look on the bottom right, the road. There's actually cars on that highway, and the cars move. Now, I don't know if anyone playing this game would have noticed that detail, but they went for it. There's a lot of little things in this game that make it seem more realistic and more attractive. Oh, I should have taken that jump, because then I would have skipped that dirt patch. You can see when it turns, right? The car's little rudder tails move, and if you bank on the turn, it also leans to the side a little bit, which is awesome. Okay, this track, oh, I hate this track. It has the magnet bars on the left and right side, which drag you towards the walls. And that's why I exploded last time, is because when you touch those walls, you lose a bunch of health. And so now we just gotta try and recover it back as much as we can. That didn't go great, but we tried. Okay, and this time when we hit the segment with the magnet bars, we just gotta be very careful not to get dragged in. Okay, so you can use your strafe L and R keys to try and avoid that. We did okay this time, we didn't lose that much health. If we lose this much health every lap, I think we have a good chance of beating without exploding. But we are 4th, so we've got to speed up a bit to overtake the next guy if we have any chance of beating this. Yeah, so I definitely think that this game is indicative of how difficult most SNES games were. A lot of SNES titles were just incredibly hard, and they required a huge amount of practice and patience from the player to make it work. Oh, he's lost so much health. Okay, we got the jump. We're now in 2nd place, and if we don't get hurt that badly, I think we are in for a win. You can hear me furiously tapping the L and R buttons to not get sucked into the walls. I hate that this game, I mentioned it in the analysis, the collision detection is not very good because it's not a real collision. And so it results in your car bouncing left and right every time you just so much as nick a wall. And it makes it very difficult because it just sends you into the next wall and the next wall, and before you know it, your car's exploded. Now, we don't have a lot of health to work with in this lap, so we've got to try to be careful but also be fast. Okay, we've made it past those stupid magnets for the last time. Let's use a boost and get into 3rd place. Nice, we did it! Oh, I didn't explode, I'm so happy. You guys have no idea, I was really worried because the first time I ran this course, I exploded 3 times on this map. And I felt really bad because I wasn't able to show any of the next levels. But hey, this time we get to explore what the Red Canyon has to offer. If we just contend with this car's horribly slow acceleration. Okay, there's a lot of hairpin turns here. That's a risky jump because you saw the car in front of us. You can jump. Oh, that was sneaky. You can jump over the terrain and effectively get yourself a shortcut. But if you miss the jump, if you mistime it, or if you don't land on the racetrack, then your car just explodes. So it's much more of a risk-reward kind of thing. I've read in places as well that a lot of speedrunners will try and collide with the other cars in order to get a boost. There is a thing called a bump boost, where at the start you want to get bumped by the car behind you, and that puts you at maximum speed straight away. And sometimes you can bump into the cars to avoid the terrain as well. Of course, it's very inconsistent. The collision detection is not fantastic, but hey, if you're at a high level, if you're getting the best scores, then you've got to use everything to your advantage, right? Okay. This is one of the few games where I feel like I'm not playing better when I talk. It's one of the games where I really need to concentrate. Okay, there's 2 laps left. This map has actually been quite nice. It's a lot of long straights and no ridiculous hazards like the last one, so I haven't been too much at risk of exploding. We just play it safe, don't take too many risky jumps, and hit all the corners right. I'm sure we'll be able to make it. And don't use a boost in a stupid way like just then. Okay, so now we're powering down, and we really need this healing bar. Okay, I think we can make it. I am confident. Yeah, it's very easy to forget. Oh, we exploded. It's very easy to forget, especially when the camera pans around like that, that this is a flat 2D map. You definitely get drawn into the illusion, and you really do start thinking that this is a 3-dimensional space. Which is pretty cool. I would say it's pretty cool. Okay, one more try at this map, see if we can beat it, and if we can't, let's just go straight to the 3rd cup, because I feel like at the very least it just shows some of the game's contents. This game I think has... I was wrong in the first cup, by the way. This game has 5 tracks per cup, which means it has a total of 15 tracks and 3 difficulty levels. Which means that there's actually quite a bit of content for this little launch title for the SNES. If you wanted to master it, if you wanted to beat everything there was to beat, it would take you a good amount of time. And if you've got this game from the SNES Online, or the Switch Online SNES package, then you've got a lot of work cut out for you. The only thing is if you find it particularly fun. Because I'm still of the opinion that this game, although it's better mechanically than Outrun, although you can see the track well and you can corner properly and all that good stuff, it just doesn't feel fast, it doesn't feel interesting. The levels are actually either quite easy, like this one, you're just driving around and making the turns when you need to, or they're like the previous one and they're just ridiculously difficult, and it's because of cheap ways. So yeah, maybe it's because I didn't grow up with this game, I didn't see how mind-blowing it was when it first came out, but yeah, it doesn't impress me as much as Outrun does still. I feel like Outrun holds up a lot better. And it's interesting to me too because I did a lot of research on the legacy of F-Zero when I was making this video, because I definitely know a lot less about it. I didn't grow up with the SNES or anything like that. It was crazy to think that although it was really renowned for the way it used the SNES's tech, there were polygonal 3D games in arcades, or racing games in the arcade that were polygonal at this point. So it surprised me that people still saw F-Zero as being this mind-blowing when I guess maybe it's the first time they've seen something like this on a home console. but it's not that impressive, I think. And this was the time when technology was really everything. I think being able to prove that you had some new tech to offer was such a big deal in the retro era. Whereas today, I think a game can launch, even if it doesn't break any boundaries in terms of technology. If it has a good story, if it has good mechanics, then it might succeed. Whereas you really needed to have a good technological hook in a lot of games in the SNES era. And if we go on to look at maybe Star Fox, or maybe what are some other pseudo 3D games? Star Fox or Stunt Race or Super Mario Kart. I think each of those has a different idea about tech that we could talk about that made it stand out at the time. Okay, so we beat this course. We're actually doing way better than I thought I would. As much as I like retro games, I am terrible at them because they're all so difficult. And they're the kind of game where I think if you're young and you grew up in it, then you kind of get the sense of what it should be like, and you get better at it just from sheer practice and brute forcing your way through the difficult levels. Whereas as someone in 2020 looking back on these games, it's hard to get into because there's all these little intricacies that you're not used to. And I think flat out, the games of the NES and SNES era assume that you're going to be playing it for a long time. So even if there's only enough content for an afternoon or so, it's going to be difficult enough that you're going to need to keep practicing and getting better at it so that you can complete it, let alone doing it quickly. Okay, so this is a snow-themed level, so there's snow on the ground, it's slippery, it's not fun. I am not having that much fun. If I take a crack at the next race, I'm going back to the red car. It makes so much difference. Like, Captain Falcon's great and all, great Smash character, all that, but his car is just... You can feel its inferiority right now. This has been a pretty good course, actually. It's narrow, and it's slippery. Actually, I take it back. This is terrible. I was saying, there's a lot of straight segments and it doesn't feel that cheap. There's no stupid stuff like the wind in... I don't think I've shown that stage, but there's a stage where there's wind that pushes you left and right, and it's just awful to play on. This one so far is alright. I think the real downside of having this flat Mode 7 world is that you don't get a clear sense of identity for each level. I know that F-Zero originally, the booklet came with a comic, and it explained all the different characters and the different worlds that didn't actually get explored in the game very much. But the sad thing about SNES Online is that they don't give the manuals to the games. They give the cover art and a brief set of instructions, and that's it. So I feel like there's a lot of good stuff that's been lost. Because I remember... Oh, exploded. I remember back in the day, game manuals were really intricate and they had a lot of good information about it. You would be excited to read the manual as much as you were to play the game sometimes. Okay, I don't really feel like trying this one again. Let's go to the third cup and see what race tracks there are there. And I am so excited to go back to the Fire Stingray. Okay, King League, beginner. This is Mute City 3. And although it looks very similar to the first Mute City map, it's got a few changes to it that makes it difficult and worthy of the third cup. Okay, so it lulls you into this nice false sense of security here, and it gives you these zigzags, which are quite hard to get around. And then there's mines in the road. One of my least favorite mechanics, because you're going so fast that you can't possibly avoid them through skill. You just gotta luck it out. And if you trigger a mine, you start the pinball chain reaction and you bounce left and right. Okay, but otherwise it's easy enough. Same soundtrack to the original Mute City as well, which I don't mind, it's a good song. I was thinking about what soundtrack I should include for the talking to PowerPoint segments of these videos, And the logical thing to do would be to just use the music from the game you're talking about, right? Oh, I'm recording this all before I edit it, by the way. That's why I'm having this conversation with myself. I would put in the F-Zero soundtrack to the F-Zero segment, but it's too upbeat. I feel like it's gonna not gel well with my rambling in front of a PowerPoint screen. So I don't know, maybe I'll go with the old-fashioned Wii music again. You know, Wii Shop music is always the most versatile soundtrack if you're doing a spoken segment. Okay, am I first? Wow, how am I doing so well? I swear on the practice run I did for this recording, I was coming 7th or 8th every race. And I was usually exploding before I could finish the course. So I'm glad that this is the footage that ends up in the video itself. Okay, never mind, that was terrible. We're still first, it's just a bit of a jankier first. Yeah, I feel like 5 laps is quite a lot for a racing game like this. It makes the track itself feel like more of an ordeal, and if you're not good with managing your health and power, it becomes this real game of attrition, because you're trying to manage how much health you can lose in a lap, and not explode by the 5th lap. Okay, let's boost through this. Classic Mario Kart trick of boosting through the corners. And we win again. Some of these later courses have all these obstacles to them as well. And so it's not always that fun of an experience. Also, I don't know if you guys caught it, but on the bottom right of the background just then, there's actually moving cars on the highway. They put in a lot of these small details. Okay, so this is Deathwind, and it's not a very well-liked stage because there's this wind that blows you left and right as you drive. And because there's no visual indicator of which direction the wind is blowing, you just need to try and feel it out based on your stupid cars wobbling left and right. It's genuinely not a great experience. I'm gonna hit a lot of walls on the stage. It's also boost pads, but they send you really fast, straight forward, and if you're not facing the exact correct way when you hit the boost pad, then you end up just taking damage, which is frustrating, because it's been a single lap and I'm down to half health. I feel like with this stage, the developers even knew that it was going to be hard, because they made the pit stop in the middle of the course where you actually can't miss it. So it's not like in other tracks where you need to strafe into the pit stop. Here, you're basically forced to hit pit stop, and I'm going to explode. Hard to talk fast when your brain is also thinking fast. Okay, let's give it one more shot at Deathwind, and if I can't beat it, I can't beat it. This is definitely a big gatekeeper to my enjoyment of F-Zero. I think one of the more advanced mechanics is just using L and R to strafe, and I think Deathwind definitely forces you to learn how to do that. It requires you to be very good at strafing, and I just hit so many walls. It's very hard to recover. If you hit one wall, you just bounce straight into the next one. I would hate to be a speedrunner or a high-level player of this, because I feel like runs could end so easily based on something silly, like just then. You tap another car, and then suddenly you're 90 degrees off. We are down to a quarter of health, and it's our second lap. Deathwind, guys. Deathwind. I definitely feel like the Stingray makes a difference, though. It's a better car. Handles a lot better. Okay, we've got someone coming from behind us, and I really don't think we can beat this. There's 2 more laps left. We are on flashing health, and we are coming 3rd. I'm too afraid to use my boost because I'll just hit walls and explode. Okay. Well, that's that. That's F-Zero. Sorry that I haven't done a great job of making it look fun. I think that the technology behind it is incredibly fascinating, and I really enjoyed looking through the history of how it was made and how it managed to use the constraints of the SNES to make something really incredible. And so I definitely recommend checking this one out if you've got Nintendo Online for the Switch. It's free, so you might as well. But I would be interested in hearing, which one do you think does racing better, Outrun or F-Zero? And what kinds of retro games do you want me to take a look at in the future? Because I have such a big list of things I want to take a look at. It interests me to think about how these old games function in our modern context, and what is valuable for us to play, and what gives us some interesting lessons about game design in our current day. And yeah, I hope this series is going to be long and regular like the Let's Play series. I don't know if I'll be able to do one every week because of this a bit more editing work involved, but hopefully I can upgrade my terrible animations packages and manage to make some good stuff that hopefully is educational and lets you know about how games developed into what they are today. Alright, thank you for hanging out. Hopefully see you next week.